On a cold, foggy night in 1778, the fate of the American Revolution did not rest on George Washington's cannons or the bravery of his starving soldiers at Valley Forge. Instead, it hung on a simple black petticoat drying on a laundry line in Setauket, Long Island. This is the untold true story of the Culper Ring, a group of ordinary farmers, tavern keepers, and housewives who became the world's most effective spy network, using invisible ink, secret codes, and sheer nerves to defeat the British Empire without ever firing a shot. The year was 1778. New York City was a forest of British masts and redcoats. For the American rebels, the situation was dire. General George Washington was a man haunted by what he didn't know. He knew how to fight, but he didn't know where the British would strike next. He needed eyes inside the city, eyes that could see through the smoke of British pipes and the secrets of high society ballrooms. In the small town of Setauket, a quiet farmer named Abraham Woodhull sat by his hearth. To his neighbors, he was a loyalist, or at least someone who stayed out of trouble. But in his heart, he burned with the fire of liberty. He was recruited by Benjamin Talmadge, Washington's director of military intelligence. Together, they would form a secret society that didn't even have a name yet, only a code: the Culper Ring. Abraham, known by the alias Samuel Culper, began his dangerous journey. Every week he would travel from Setauket to British-occupied Manhattan under the guise of visiting his sister. There he would walk the streets, listening to the chatter of British soldiers in taverns, counting the ships in the harbor, and observing the movements of General Henry Clinton. But how could he get this information back to Washington without being caught? The British were everywhere, and the penalty for spying was a short drop from a tall gallows. This is where the genius of the ring came in. They used a sophisticated system that was far ahead of its time. They didn't write letters in plain English. Instead, they used sympathetic stain, an early form of invisible ink developed by Sir James Jay. To the naked eye, a letter would look like a boring update about family or farm life. But when the recipient applied a specific chemical reagent, the hidden military secrets would appear like magic on the parchment. Then there was Anna Smith Strong, a woman whose name history almost forgot, but whose laundry saved a nation. Anna lived on a cliffside farm overlooking the bay. When a message was ready to be picked up by a rebel boatman named Caleb Brewster, Anna would hang a black petticoat on her clothesline. To a passing British patrol, it was just laundry. To the spies, it was a signal. The number of handkerchiefs she hung next to the petticoat told Caleb which hidden cove to pull his boat into. One of the astonishing facts about the Culper Ring was their code book. Talmadge created a dictionary where 763 numbers represented specific words. For example, Washington was 711, New York was 727, and spy was somebody. Even if the British intercepted a message, all they would see were columns of numbers that made no sense. As the months grew higher, the stakes grew heavier. In 1780, the Ring discovered a plot that would have changed history forever. They uncovered evidence that a high-ranking American officer was planning to betray the fort at West Point to the British. That officer was none other than Benedict Arnold, Washington's most trusted general. Because of the Culper Ring's intelligence, Arnold's contact, Major John Andre, was captured, the plot was foiled, and the American Revolution was saved from a fatal blow. The narrative deepens as we move from the clever mechanics of the laundry line into the dark, soot-stained streets of occupied Manhattan. This is the heart of the machine, where the risk of death was a daily companion.
Robert Townsend was a man of silence. In the bustling, chaotic atmosphere of British-occupied New York, Silence was the only thing that kept a man's head out of a noose. A dry goods merchant and a society columnist for a loyalist newspaper, Townsend was the perfect ghost. He was Culper Jr., the second pillar of the ring. While Woodhull operated from the outskirts, Townsend lived in the belly of the beast. He stood behind his counter, selling expensive fabrics to the wives of British generals and fine tea to the officers themselves. The British officers, arrogant in their control of the city, viewed Townsend as a humble, perhaps even dull merchant. They spoke freely in his presence, discussing troop movements, naval arrivals, and the frustrations of the war. They didn't realize that the man measuring their silk was memorizing every word. Townsend's life was a masterclass in psychological endurance. He lived a double life so convincing that even his own family believed he was a British sympathizer. This social isolation was the heavy price he paid for the cause of a nation that didn't yet exist. One of the most astonishing facts about Townsend's operation was his use of the sympathetic stain. While invisible inks had existed for centuries, usually using lemon juice that appeared when heated, the British knew those tricks. Washington's spies used something far more advanced. Sir James Jay, a physician and brother of the future Supreme Court Justice John Jay, had invented a two-part chemical process. Townsend would write a seemingly innocuous letter about the price of grain or the health of a fictional ant using one chemical. The message remained invisible and stable even if held over a candle. Only when the second chemical reagent was brushed over the paper by Washington himself would the hidden text emerge in a vibrant green or blue. This was the Enigma machine of the 18th century, a technological edge that the British, despite their superior resources, could not crack. As the war ground on into 1779, the Ring faced its most mysterious and perhaps most tragic member, Agent 355. To this day, the true identity of 355 remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. 355 was the Culper code for lady. She was a woman of high social standing, likely a member of a prominent loyalist family who had access to the inner circles of the British High Command. Imagine a candlelit ballroom in the Kennedy Mansion or a dinner party hosted by the British Commander-in-Chief. While the violins played and the wine flowed, 355 was listening. She was a master of the soft intelligence, the whispers of a general's mood, the offhand mention of a destination for the next fleet, or the arrival of a secret diplomat from London. There is strong evidence that she played a critical role in identifying the cracks in Major John Andre's security, which eventually led to the exposure of Benedict Arnold. However, the shadow world claimed her. Legend suggests she was eventually captured and died on the infamous British prison ship, the HMS Jersey, refusing to betray the names of her fellow spies. The logistics of the Ring were a miracle of timing. Once Townsend had the information in New York, he would pass it to a courier named Austin Rowe. Rowe, a tavern owner with nerves of steel, would ride 55 miles across British patrolled territory to Setauket. He would hide the messages in a secret drop box on a farm. Then came the signal from Anna Smith Strong's laundry, the Black Petticoat. Caleb Brewster, the whaleboat man, was the final link. Brewster was a giant of a man, a professional sailor who knew every hidden cove and sandbar of the Long Island Sound. In the dead of night, often under the cover of a storm, he would row his small boat across the treacherous waters, dodging British gunboats that patrolled the Sound like hungry sharks. He would meet Benjamin Talmadge on the Connecticut shore, who would then gallop the message directly to Washington's headquarters. From the streets of New York to Washington's desk, the intelligence moved through a chain of people who were one mistake away from the gallows. The information they provided was not just helpful, it was world-changing.
In the summer of 1780, the French were sending a massive fleet and thousands of troops to aid the Americans at Newport, Rhode Island. The British found out and prepared a massive naval ambush. If the French fleet were destroyed upon arrival, the Revolution would have ended right then and there. But the Culper Ring caught wind of the British plan. Townshend got the word out, Roe rode like the wind, Brewster rode through the fog, and Washington received the warning in time to move his army and deceive the British into staying in New York. The French landed safely. The alliance was preserved. Without the invisible ink of a merchant and the laundry of a housewife, the United States might never have seen its first birthday.
By the autumn of 1780, the American Revolution was gasping for air. The continental currency was worthless, the soldiers were mutinous from hunger, and the British had successfully captured Charleston, South Carolina. But the greatest threat to the birth of the United States didn't come from a British bayonet or a royal decree. It came from within the heart of the American command. Benedict Arnold was George Washington's most brilliant field commander. He was a hero of Saratoga, a man of incredible physical courage who had a leg shattered in the service of his country. But Arnold was also a man of bottomless ego and mounting debt. He felt unappreciated by Congress and passed over for promotions. His new wife, the beautiful Peggy Shippen, came from a wealthy Loyalist family in Philadelphia and was used to a life of luxury that a rebel general's salary could not provide. The Culper Ring, operating in the shadows of New York, began to pick up whispers. Robert Townshend, Culper Jr., noticed that Major John Andre, the dashing head of British intelligence, was increasingly absent from the social galas of Manhattan. Andre was a poet, an artist, and a master spy who managed a network of his own. The Ring's couriers reported a strange surge in coded correspondence passing through the neutral ground, the lawless territory of Westchester County that lay between the British and American lines. The prize was West Point. This massive fortress sat on a high bend of the Hudson River. If the British captured West Point, they would control the river, effectively slicing the American colonies in two. New England would be cut off from the South, and the Revolution would bleed out in weeks. In August 1780, Arnold used his influence to get himself appointed as the commander of West Point. Almost immediately, he began a secret correspondence with Major Andre. Using the aliases Gustavus and John Anderson, they negotiated the price for the betrayal. £20,000, millions in today's currency, and a high-ranking commission in the British Army. On the night of September 21, 1780, the treason reached its boiling point. Major Andre was ferried up the Hudson by the British sloop Vulture. He met Arnold in a dark thicket of woods near Havestraw, New York. Under the cover of darkness, Arnold handed over the blueprints of West Point, the locations of the heavy artillery, and the schedule of the guard rotations. He even suggested the best places for British troops to land. But fate and the vigilance of the surrounding countryside had other plans. As the sun began to rise, American cannons on the shore opened fire on the Vulture. The ship, damaged and fearing destruction, was forced to retreat downriver, leaving Andre stranded behind American lines. Arnold, panicked, gave Andre a set of civilian clothes and a travel pass signed in his own name. Andre, now a spy by definition because he was out of uniform and using a false name, hid the incriminating papers inside his silk stockings, tucked beneath the soles of his feet. He began the perilous journey back to New York City by land, riding through the neutral ground, a place where bands of cowboys, pro-British, and skinners, pro-American, robbed anyone they found. On the morning of September 23, Andre was stopped near Tarrytown by 3 local militiamen, John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart. At first, Andre, thinking they were pro-British cowboys, made a fatal mistake. He told them he was a British officer. When the men revealed they were Americans, Andre tried to show them Arnold's pass, but it was too late. They searched him. They stripped him of his coat and his hat, finding nothing. It was only when they ordered him to pull off his boots that they found the folded papers in his stockings. Paulding, the only one of the three who could read, looked at the documents and exclaimed, "My God, he is a spy!" The news traveled like a lightning strike. When George Washington arrived at West Point a few days later for a scheduled inspection, he found the fort in disarray and Arnold gone. Arnold had received word of Andre's capture just minutes before Washington's arrival and had fled to the very British ship, the Vulture, that had left Andre behind. Washington was devastated. He reportedly sat in his room weeping and asked his aides, "Whom can we trust now?" But while the betrayal of Arnold was a blow to the soul of the nation, the work of the Culper Ring ensured that the damage was contained. The information the Ring had gathered over the previous years about British naval movements allowed Washington to move his troops with confidence, even while the Viper was in his nest. Major John Andre was executed by hanging, a gentleman's death denied to him because he was caught as a spy. He went to the gallows with such grace that even his American captors wept. The capture of Andre was the turning point of the war's intelligence battle. It proved that while the British had more money and more formal training, the Americans had something more powerful, a network of ordinary citizens who were willing to risk everything for a cause. However, the war was far from over. The British, furious at the loss of Andre and the failure of the West Point plot, began a brutal crackdown in New York. They knew there was a leak. They knew Culper existed. The hunt for the Ring intensified, and for Robert Townsend and Abraham Woodhull, the walls were closing in.
The execution of Major John Andre sent a shockwave through the British High Command in New York City. General Henry Clinton, the British commander-in-chief, was not just mourning a friend, he was consumed by a cold, sharpening fury. He realized that his headquarters, his very dinner table, was compromised. The British began a reign of terror in Manhattan, turning the city into a panopticon of suspicion. For the members of the Culper Ring, the air grew thin, and the shadows they inhabited became more dangerous than ever. Robert Townsend, or Culper Jr., felt the noose tightening. He was a man of naturally anxious temperament, and the pressure of maintaining his merchant facade while Andre's ghost haunted the city streets began to break him. He saw redcoats in every shadow. He moved his lodgings frequently, and for a period he even ceased communication with Woodhull and Washington. He was terrified, and with good reason. The British were dragging suspects into the sugar house prisons and the hold of the HMS Jersey. If there's one amazing fact that underscores the stakes of this story, it is the horror of the British prison ships anchored in Wallabout Bay. The HMS Jersey, a stripped-down, decaying 64-gun man-of-war, was known as Hell. More Americans died on these ships than in every battle of the Revolution combined. Nearly 11,000 prisoners perished from smallpox, yellow fever, and starvation. Every morning, the British guards would shout down into the darkness of the hold, "Rebels, bring out your dead!" For a spy, the Jersey was a fate worse than the gallows. It was a slow, agonizing erasure. Yet, in this climate of absolute fear, a new and unlikely hero emerged within the Manhattan network, Hercules Mulligan. Mulligan was an Irish immigrant and a high-fashion tailor whose shop on Queen Street was the it place for British officers to get their uniforms fitted. He was also a close friend of a young, ambitious officer named Alexander Hamilton. While Townsend was the silent observer, Mulligan was the charismatic talker. He was the confidential correspondent who worked alongside the Culper Ring, but often operated on his own daring whims. Mulligan's secret weapon was his charm and his slave, Cato. While Mulligan was measuring the waistlines of British generals, he would flatter them, offering fine scotch and listening to their complaints. The officers, viewing him as a mere tradesman, spoke of their secret orders as if the tailor were a piece of furniture. Twice, Hercules Mulligan saved George Washington's life. On one occasion, a British officer came to Mulligan's shop late at night, needing a coat in a hurry. When Mulligan asked why the rush, the officer boasted that they had received a tip on Washington's location and were riding out to capture the Old Fox by morning. As soon as the officer left, Mulligan dispatched Cato. Cato was one of the unsung heroes of the Revolution. As a black man in a British-occupied city, he could move through the streets with a level of invisibility that even Townsend didn't have. He carried the warning through the British lines, reaching Washington's camp just hours before the British raid arrived. When the Redcoats reached the farmhouse where Washington had been sleeping, the bed was still warm, but the general was gone. By 1781, the war was reaching its crescendo, but the American treasury was empty. Washington knew he needed one final, crushing blow to end the war. He had his eyes on New York City, the British stronghold. But the British had 10,000 troops there, protected by a massive fleet. A direct attack would be suicide. This is where the Culper Ring performed its greatest feat of deception. Washington decided to pivot his entire army south to Yorktown, Virginia, to trap Lord Cornwallis. But to do this, he had to march his army right past New York without the British attacking his flank. The ring went into overdrive. Washington began leaking false information. He wrote fake letters to his generals, knowing they would be intercepted. He ordered the construction of massive brick ovens in New Jersey, making it look like he was preparing to feed an army for a long siege of New York. The Culper spies in the city confirmed these rumors to British officers, reinforcing the lie. Townsend and Mulligan reported that General Clinton was convinced the attack was coming to Manhattan. Clinton was so deceived that he ordered Cornwallis and Virginia to send troops back to New York for reinforcements. By the time the British realized that Washington's army wasn't in New Jersey anymore, it was too late. The Americans and the French were already at the gates of Yorktown. The deception was so perfect that Clinton remained hunkered down in New York, waiting for a battle that would never come, while the British Empire lost the war 400 miles to the south. The Culper Ring didn't just provide information, they provided the mirage that allowed the United States to win its independence.